Hi, everyone. I'm George Christie with the Wine Industry Network. Welcome to episode 3 of our newly launched wine industry educational series. Now, to give you a little bit of background on the upcoming session, a few years ago, we launched a conference called the Wine and Weed Symposium, where we looked at the impact that legal cannabis might have on our industry. And the event this year was scheduled for August. We had to cancel like a lot of other events because of the COVID crisis, but there were a few sessions that we still wanted to deliver to our audience, and today is one of those. A question that came up every year, whether it was at our conference or through some of the interviews that I was involved in, had to do about the influence that cannabis or hemp grown near a vineyard might have on that particular vineyard. You know, how the terpenes might negatively influence the flavors of grapes if grown too close to a vineyard. And it was a question that I couldn't answer. And quite frankly, I had a hard time finding anybody that could answer until recently when I had the pleasure of meeting our guest presenter today, Dr. George Sellu. George, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, George.
Now, George is the program director and instructor of agribusiness at the Santa Rosa Junior College. And last year, George oversaw a project at Shone Farm, which is a farm owned and operated by the junior college, where you guys have grapes, fruit trees, vegetables. I think you have sunflowers up there. I think you guys even run some cattle up on the ranch. Is that right?
Sometimes, yep.
Yeah. So last year they decided to do a project where they grew some hemp. And among other things, one of the things that you looked at was if there was an impact of the terpenes on the vineyard. And it was in pretty close proximity. Is that correct, George?
That is correct. That is correct.
So when we learned about the project, I had a chance to meet with George, and he was willing to present at the session or at the conference, and of course join us today and do the webinar in lieu of the conference not taking place. And George, is there anything you want to add before we let you take it away and share?
Well, I'm ready to dive right into it and share what we know and what we don't know.
All right. Well, George, I'm going to let you take it. I'll let you take it from here and jump into the presentation. I'll join you at the end. We'll take some questions and we'll go from there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, George. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As George mentioned, my name is George Sellu, and I coordinate the agriculture business and hemp agriculture programs at Santa Rosa Junior College. Our topic for today's webinar has been a contentious one in California, especially in wine growing regions. And so I hope that at the end of this talk today, we'll have a better understanding of whether hemp or cannabis and wine grapes can coexist based on science and facts. So when we started planting hemp at Shone Farm, we had a few other questions that we wanted to answer. And I'll walk you through the process, give you some background as to how we got here. And so when I started this project, I was looking at collecting data on around best agronomic practices and around, whether hemp can coexist with other crops. And I was able to convince my co-authors of this study to actually work with me in collecting this data. And the co-authors that I worked with listed here on my screen. I want to thank them for their patience in working with me on this project that culminated, of course, in a white paper. Of course, we have a lot of students, a lot of staff at the farm that helped us get this project through. But these are the folks who helped me in the data collection, analysis, and the write-up, and I want to thank them very much for that. And so one of the things the reason why we got into this, and I want to make this clear, is that when we talked to the Ag Commissioner then, he was clear that there's been a gap in the knowledge base in hemp cultivation across the country. Because again, we had not grown up until 2018, we had not grown hemp on a large scale in the US since the 1930s. So there was this gap in that knowledge and understanding also, okay, if we're going to grow hemp, how does hemp interact with other crops? What are the best management practices? What are the type of varieties that do well in different areas across the country? We then had to help the Ag Commissioner in trying to answer some of those questions. And this project was the beginning of projects that we thought will help. And by no means is this project the end all. but we hope this is the beginning of research projects to come. And so just a little background on hemp, because I think a lot of times I run to people and they have a lot of confusion about hemp. Again, hemp is a biotype of cannabis, and people grow hemp. There are different forms of hemp people are growing now across the US. People are growing hemp for flour, for oil, and they refer to that as CBD hemp in a lot of places. Some folks are growing hemp just for fiber, and some folks are growing dual crop, which in this case will be for fiber and for flour. And some in some areas like Kansas and Kentucky, they're growing tri-crop, which they're growing for seed, flour, and fiber. And to remind folks that, and of course, before I jump to that, to remind folks that there are a lot of uses of hemp that I don't have time to touch on today, but maybe hopefully I can when we wrap up. If you have any questions about the uses and processing of hemp, we'll have some time to answer those questions. So hemp, really, by definition, by the federal government, should have THC content, which is the tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the psychoactive component of cannabis. It should have less than 0.3%, right? Compared to traditional marijuana, you're talking about average of 15%. So this is something that is not going to make anybody high, right? Again, if you grew it for flower, right? So again, once it was descheduled in 2018, we've seen a lot of increase in the acreage that people are cultivating right now, across the country. And I think last year we had well over 500,000 licensed hemp acreage in the U.S. And again, so this is, hemp is not going anywhere. It's legalized now, so we have to find ways to actually understand the crop and know how we can grow the crop better. And there are other crops in that family, in the Cannabisaceae family, that people are not aware of. Plants such as hops, very common around Sonoma County. Hackberries are very common around here as well. Those are from the same family. So therefore, it will be interesting for us to understand the chemistry of these plants, how they grow and how they interact with other crops that will really grow around here in Sonoma County. And so, so I hope this is a kind of a little background for you in terms of understanding where we go with hemp. And so some of the things that came up, as I mentioned earlier on, for the Ag Commissioner's office, we're like looking at how do we advise farmers, new farmers who want to get into farming? Because farmers are now looking at hemp as a way to supplement their income or to increase their farm revenue. So tobacco farmers now across the country are switching over to hemp because the return, per acre is much higher than what they were doing. And so then we need to provide these farmers some knowledge. So we're looking at it mostly as an institution from an educational perspective to see how do we provide knowledge for people, right? And then we ended up stumbling upon the next problem here, which is how can hemp be successfully cultivated with other agricultural crops? And so I'm gonna touch on that here quickly, so that way I can give you some background into what we did in our project. But I wanted to provide this type of background for you very quickly. So here are some of the objectives that we set for ourselves for this project. Again, these are very critical for the wine industry. We want to identify and quantitate terpene production among these two hemp varieties that we're growing as shown, which I'll talk about later on. And if you go down the list, the last thing we want to determine whether hemp terpene taints wine grapes or wine. And these are really important things because, again, I've had this over and over about hemp tainting wine grapes or about cannabis tainting wine grapes. And it's been hard for me to help people answer those questions because I can't find any research within the US that's actually documented this. So it's been a very challenging thing for me to say, well, I know it happens or I know it doesn't happen. So I was trying to figure out a way to help answer or contribute to this knowledge base in terms of answering these questions. So prior to the scheduling hemp, we have had a lot of people complain about the potential of hemp. That was a big pushback. People were worried about hemp or cannabis farms tainting their wine grapes, right? But we haven't had the chance to do any of these type of projects to actually really do some real research to find out whether this is supported by the research or not. And so we wanted to see if we could plant some hemp close to a wine vineyard to be able to answer some of these questions, right? So here's what we did. So we collected two varieties of hemp. One was a box, the other one was a box cherry, which really has a really complex terpene profile. And we planted this really, really close, as you heard in the introduction, to our student block. Our student wine grape block is only used for students who are practicing for viticultural practices. It's well kept. They do all the practices there, and we harvest all the wine grapes to make wine for their winemaking classes. So that particular vineyard is about 68.5 feet, which my colleague measured from the hemp field that we had at Shone last year. And in the ordinance for hemp cultivation in the county, that easement between a hemp field and a vineyard or any agricultural field should be about 200 feet. So we were a lot closer than the ordinance, actually states. So again, we wanted to find out whether, if at all, there's hemp drift, terpene drift, we should be able to see it. If we have it at 68.5 feet, we should see a lot more, more than we'll see if we're at 200 feet. So here's what the field looked like. So what you're seeing on the left-hand side of your screen, that's where that's the hemp field. And then what you're seeing, which has the yellow border around it, what you're seeing on the right-hand side of your screen is where the student vineyard block is with the red borders around it. Of course, this picture is courtesy of my colleague, Professor Grogan, who helped me put some of these images together. And so if you look at this field, that's our plot. We're collecting data on wind speed, wind direction, all of those things. And I'll talk about those much later in the presentation. So let me just move us forward a little bit, just to give you some visuals about what the field looked like. So this was our hemp right here. This is some of the mature plants. You can see some of the inflorescence right here, which some people refer to as the colas. And most of the terpenes that we were testing for, we find a lot of those at the top 18 inches of the plant so we collected samples based on those guidelines from the state. And this is what our field looked like. This is the edge of our field. We planted the field with broom corn on the edges and some sunflower as a border. So we used it mostly for windbreaks. And this was my colleague measuring out to this vineyard over here. This is the student block. This is how close the student block was to the hemp field. And then to give you where we started, on the left-hand side, these are our seeds. We started seeds for our cherry wine variety crossed with box. And these are our clones that we started in the greenhouse. And then we transplanted this into the field. So this is what the initial plants look like with our drip tapes. These were planted in raised beds. And this is where the plants are a little older here. So you can see the progression of where we were in this process. And this is where the plants were a little larger. You can see, so we had the broom corn closer to the hemp. On the outside, we had sunflower, right? Again, we planted this for windbreak. Some folks might say they will help, mitigate terpene drift, or they will attract beneficial insects. But our goal was mostly, for windbreak. And this was harvest right here. We're harvesting. This was during harvesting and drying. So you can see the finished product here. And these were dried. Some of it was sent in for extraction. So we had the students go from seed all the way to harvest so they can see the entire process. So now that we've talked about that, I'd like to touch a little bit on terpenes, because we've had a lot about terpenes, right? And a lot of people, I'm not sure people who talk to me about terpenes, sometimes they do understand what terpenes are or how they behave or their chemical composition. I'm not sure. So I'd like to touch on that briefly here today. Again, when you look at terpenes, right? Again, terpenes are sometimes referred to as volatile organic compounds, and they're made up of a union or bonding between carbon atoms and isoprene units, right? And so there are different forms of terpenes. You will hear somebody talk about, monoterpenes or sesquiterpenes, right? Those are the two that are most common in hemp, okay? And again, terpenes are responsible for the flavor and the aroma that you get from hemp. But then my question would be, is hemp or cannabis the only thing that has terpenes? That's where people get lost, right? Because they assume that when they hear terpenes, they think cannabis. They don't think about other agricultural plants or commodities, that we actually produce. And so today, I hope that I can actually shine some light on terpenes, right? Just basic. Now, when I go into the chemistry, just a basic understanding of terpenes being formed by carbon and isoprene units, and also terpenes responsible for aromas and flavors. And again, when you look back at it, so people were arguing about, well, terpenes are going to taint our grapes. Terpenes are, the terpenes are, they have this odor that we don't like at all. It's, too strong. But we forget that there are other plants besides hemp or cannabis that put out terpenes, a lot of terpenes, right? And so I wanted to share with you a few other things just for some context, right? So we understand that some of the plants that we don't even pay attention to actually produce a lot of terpenes. So here are some plants that I put together this list. On the left-hand side, we have the terpenes, right? And of course, you can see a lot more of this. I just selected some of these to show you. So you can see, like, for example, something like ocimene, which is found in hemp, it's found in wine grapes, and it's found in carrots, right? Linalool, which is used a lot for making, insect repellents, right? It's found in lavender, wine grapes, and hemp. So then my question becomes, if you find linalool in wine grapes, do you accuse the hemp grower, or do you even understand that occurs naturally in wine grapes, right? Or if you find something like pinene, right, in wine grapes, do you accuse somebody who is growing hemp close by, or do you accuse somebody who has a forest about 5 miles down the street that is a pine forest? Okay, so until you understand that some of these terpenes that we're talking about also occur in wine grapes naturally, then it changes the calculus of these accusations, right? Because we know that, because then how do you know that a particular terpene, for example, something like ocimene, was not already in the grape or was not in the carrot already? So you can accuse the hemp grower if you have hemp, wine grapes and carrots growing in the same area and they all show up with ocimene. You cannot accuse the grape grower or the wine grower or the carrot grower, because that particular terpene is found in all three of those plants. So if we understand that about terpenes, right, then it helps us understand the rest of what I'm going to be talking about today, that these terpenes are found in plants that we don't even pay attention to. So not just accusing, and I'll talk about the efficacy of the studies that have been used as a basis for these arguments. Okay, so let me touch just briefly on some of the factors that we paid attention to in the research, in the literature. Some of the factors that have been cited as factors that influence the transport of terpenes. Okay, the terpene can be transported, of course, through air and through the soil. So basically, but the factors that influence that will include temperature, wind speed, wind direction, and also the stage of the plant, because plants produce certain levels of terpenes at certain points in their life cycle. So we wanted to capture that point where the plants are producing the maximum amount of terpenes and try to capture that in this study. And then the season, of course, you're going to see less of that, volatilization in the winter than you will see during the summer or early fall. Wind direction, we captured, you saw some of the images earlier on, we captured wind direction over the entire study, and the wind speed and the daily temperature and humidity, just as a way to understand so that we know exactly whether those factors actually were impacting. And there's a whole white paper. So today I'm just running through snippets of the white paper here for you to see. So some of the studies that have been brought up, are based around eucalyptus and pine. These have been done out of the US. So my concern with these studies is really serious. Studies were done between eucalyptus and wine grapes, or between pine and wine grapes. And by extension, some folks have been trying to suggest that because it happens between eucalyptus, if it does happen, eucalyptus and wine grapes, it should happen between hemp and wine grapes. Now, remember, some of these terpenes we talked about are already present in wine grapes in the natural form. Yeah, some varieties more than others. So then So the basis of this argument is very problematic from a scientific perspective, because we haven't done the studies with these two specific crops to really understand that, right? And then we also know from the literature that eucalyptol, which is found in eucalyptus, is also found in wine grapes, but people don't understand. And in this study, they call it the mystery aroma. They call it the mystery aroma. Well, some chemists are arguing that eucalyptol is formed by the transformation that happens during winemaking. We don't know that. So there's not a conclusive science on that. So there's two issues I'm arguing here. Try to extend eucalyptus to wine grapes and taking that and saying it should work for hemp and wine grapes problematic. Also, because folks have said that eucalyptol is not only in eucalyptus, it's in other plants. And so you cannot say that eucalyptol is exclusively only found in eucalyptus. Okay, so that's problematic. So I think the science is not speaking to that. So that claim, as far as I'm concerned, has not been supported by the research. So that's why I have a problem with. And then also, finally, looking at the plants when these plants grow. If you think about it, these plants typically grow, they're annuals. So you harvest your hemp and you're done. Eucalyptus and pine are perennial, so they're there the whole time, right? So it's very difficult for me to then argue that it's possible that the level of, if there's tint from pine that is a perennial, or eucalyptus that is a perennial, will be the same as a plant that is only in the ground for about 90 to 120 days. That's also problematic for me. Okay, so here's what we did in terms of our research. So we collected data really from these sources that I'm going over here. We collected from the inflorescence of the hemp plant. Okay, we did 3 random samples from each variety each week over a 4-week period, when we knew that was a time when the plants were producing the most amount of terpenes. Okay, and then the next thing that we did was, at that same time when we're collecting, we'll do it once a week. We'll go out once a week, we'll collect the samples, create a composite sample, and then at the same time between 9 and 10 in the morning, go out and collect clusters of wine grapes from the north side and the south side of the vineyard. And we'll do the same thing. We'll collect these random samples, then we'll take those to the lab at the same time and get those tested using an instrument called the GCMS, okay, a gas chromatography mass spectrometer, which is the standard, right? They use what they call a headspace for that, and the chemists in the audience will understand that, and they use that to analyze the wine grapes and the hemp inflorescence to test for the presence of, or to quantitate these terpenes, right? And so basically that's what we did. Did that every week over 4 weeks, right? And then what the other thing we did was, with the wine, we actually made wine from the grapes from these blocks that we were using, that we were sending to the lab for testing. We made wine. We made wine from the north side of the vineyard, south side of the vineyard, and some of the wine we added mug, which some of you winemakers will understand that refers to material other than grapes. And so we added, we had one with no mug, 1% and a 3% of mug, because again, mug will be leaves. So we're concerned that maybe if terpene had drifted, they might have settled on the leaves. So we wanted to make sure we incorporate the leaves. And this was based on industry standard for winemaking. And we had an industry winemaker make these wines. And then the wines were also tested, right, to see if they had the terpenes that we're finding in the terpene, in the hemp inflorescence, right? And then the last thing we did was we took those same wines and had a sensory panel and have them taste the wine and evaluate the wine for the type of terpenes that could have drifted and tinted the wine grapes. So again, 3 things. We tested the hemp to see what type of terpenes they're putting out and how much of it. Tested the wine grapes, right, to see if the grape skins had these terpenes, right, if they were tinted. And then we tested the resulting wine, right, to see, we tested it with a lab instrument, and then we did a sensory panel testing on that. So we thought that this is enough to give us enough data to understand whether, in fact, terpene drift was occurring and whether the grapes were tainted. And so I mentioned this earlier on, what we collected data on, the sensory panel. So just to make sure that we were able to capture enough data. Again, as we said, this study is not by all means the end of this. I think this is the beginning of research studies around this topic. And but we just wanted to make sure we shine some light on this at this point. And then, so for the results, so we found that, terpenes, especially the three terpenes I listed here, myrcene, ocimene, and caryophyllene, we saw that they increased in the plants as we approached harvest. Okay. And we saw that when we harvested the grape, we found that we could not detect any of those same terpenes on the wine grapes that we took into the lab for testing. And we found that the wines that were made, that were tested in the laboratory, again, these were laboratories that test wine. These are laboratories that also test for terpenes, right? And they did not, using the current instruments, we did not find detectable levels. Now, and these are the instruments that are out there. Should they create new instruments or should they create new capabilities for those instruments in the future? Maybe we'll find something. But for now, with those instruments that are used in the industry, there was no detectable levels, right? And then the sensory panel tested these wines. There were 10 people tasting these wines who've done a lot of tasting, blind tasting. And that's all documented in our white paper, and we'll be happy to share that with you. So here are the results, briefly just visuals. So I know some of you like to see visuals. You can see basically, so this is just showing you the level of each of these major terpenes here. So you can see here this first one, that's myrcene. And you can see the yellow one right here, which is ocimene again. So you can see that they peaked right about here. And as they got toward harvest, that began to decline. So what we were looking for really is at this point, if indeed there's any amount of taint or any terpene drift, we should have seen it right here when there's a very high amount of terpene being put out or produced by these particular plants, right? And so we did that, and this is for the cherry wine variety, which had a really, really nice terpene profile, right? And we didn't see anything. And the box terpene was okay, but it wasn't as complex as the box cross with the cherry wine. Again, we should have seen, right about here, we should have seen, if there was indeed a drift or taint, we should have seen it right about this point on the wine grapes, right? Because they were increasing from the hemp, or the malts producing the hemp. And so if this is really true, we should see it appearing on the wine grapes. And so when you look at the wine grapes from this output here from our GCMS, you see the different wine grape samples that were tested in the lab. These were the wines, the two batches of wines. These were the grapes. These are the grapes with leaves. You can see all of this is less than LOD, right? Which is level of detection. So basically they were all less than the level that this instrument, that the GCMS could detect, right? So, and we know that the sensory panel also did not detect these terpenes that we saw in the hemp. So the question then becomes, the question that was set out to answer was, is there any drift? Is there any taint? Well, based on the industry standards that we have today and based on what we did, kind of very robust in the way we tested everything, we have not found any taint in the wine grape. Was our research design perfect? Not by any means, right? There's areas for improvement. There's areas we need to replicate this more across different wine regions across the state. But for now, we know that what we did at the farm clearly tells us that there was no terpene taint on the wine grapes or the resulting wine. And so I think in the future, we're going to continue doing some of this work. We'd like to improve our experimental design, replicate these studies across different wine regions, and maybe even get specialized equipment to actually capture air quality or the air above all the plants in the field, so we can actually see if indeed we're getting any of these terpenes in the atmosphere, how far they're going and where are they ending up. And so we want to be able to do that. And then and would like to improve detection of the GCMS, talking to chemists, talking to wine laboratories to see exactly if they can improve their sensitivity of their devices. And so I hope that we've provided some guidance, some ideas as to why we should not make assumptions about whether hemp will taint wine grapes, but I hope we've provided some light that, as for what we know now, it does not happen. And we're looking forward to continue this work with everybody to understand exactly how we can continue to grow both hemp and wine grapes in Sonoma County. I want to thank you very much for your time, and I'll hang around for questions with George. And thank you again for joining us today. All right.
Well, thank you very much. That was really interesting, George.
What did I do? 32 minutes. I guess I mumbled a few times. That's okay.
It was fantastic. I want to cut right to the chase in terms of another question that comes up over and over again, and that has to do with on the financial side. We talked a little bit about this, but from, let's say, like an acre of hemp, like what sort of range in terms of return on investment might a grower expect?
I would say probably, if depending on what you're growing, if you're growing for smokable flower, right? So you're talking about $40,000 to $80,000 an acre, right? If you're growing for fiber, you're probably talking about maybe $1,000 to $1,200 per acre, right?
And some of the growing for fiber is that we talked a little bit about this in our pre-interview. That's a little bit more of what you're seeing in the Midwest, for example.
In the Midwest, yeah, yes, because you got to do a larger acreage so that so even in California we might see it up in the Butte, Colusa, rice field areas where there's a lot of open space. You're gonna see it more. They're not in Sonoma County. Number one, real estate is so expensive, so you got to be doing at least over 50 or 100 acres for it to start penciling out for you.
Right. Yeah. But we talked a little about how you're seeing, more and more products that we're used to. We talked a little bit about shipping, shipping cartons and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Transitioning from styrofoam to cardboard and now to hemp. Is that a trend that you anticipate us seeing more of?
What's that?
Is that a trend that you think we're going to continue to see?
Oh, yes.
Unfolding?
Yes. Absolutely, because people are thinking about sustainability, right? They're thinking about how can we be sustainable, right? So now, if I go from styrofoam, which is going to clog our landfill, versus getting a hemp packaging that is compostable, that is biodegradable. Right. So even if it's going to cost me a few pennies more, I'm going to switch to that, right? So we're going to see a little bit of that. And we're going to see people, instead of using materials that might be carcinogenic for doing ceiling tiles or flooring material, we're going to see them switch over to using, hemp products, right? For flooring, for building materials. And now we're seeing cars, right? People are making car parts out of hemp, right? People are making, sailboat, sails for sailboats made out of hemp. So we're going to see that. We're seeing a Levi coming out with a pair of jeans. Patagonia is coming out, with some work pants, right, that are going to be made out of hemp. So we're seeing this trend, and it's just going to be we've seen Brownie paper towel get a contract in Atlanta to start making the paper towel out of that. We're seeing toilet paper being made out of that now. So we're going to see, and again, so when that begins to happen, then you see a plant that is so versatile, you can use every part of the plant. Because now if you planted a dual crop or a tri crop, you've used the seeds, you've used the flower, then you get the stem, you chop that stem up, and you're making paper towel out of it. Or you're getting the pulp out, use the pulp to make paper, then you use the back to make other products. So it's a plant that you can use. So you go to a zero waste. Then when you get tired, you take the roots out of the ground and grind that out and put it in facials. Right. Right.
Now, let me switch gears on you a little bit. So we talked a lot about, the hemp impacting grapes. And of course, that's something that, that would concern a grape grower. But another, something else that I as you were speaking to this, came to me with regard to our grape growers and the drift from the vineyard impacting hemp, putting the grape grower potentially in a liable situation, right? Because now the hemp grower is got a problem with the grape grower because there's drift coming from the vineyard onto the hemp. I mean, is that something that our grape growers need to be concerned about as well?
Right. And so I think that's a bigger issue. I think going from drift from wine grapes going to hemp or cannabis, because again, some of the things that are sprayed in the vineyard are not allowed. If you think about it, right, you can find anything at the store today and spray it on a vineyard somewhere.
Right.
In hemp, the list of things that are approved to spray on hemp in California, you can count on one hand that are allowed legally for you to spray.
Right.
So if you spray something that is banned, right, that is allowed for grapes, but is banned for hemp or cannabis, then that cannabis or that hemp fails compliance test, and you can't harvest it. It's done. It's toast. People are trying to work on ways to remediate now, but that's very expensive, and it's not really. The science is not at that point yet to be able to remediate, right? So it's still kind of in its infancy. So it's more expensive. So I think it's going to have to be being good neighbors on both sides, right? So the hemp growers understand that, okay, I'm going to do 200 feet. And the vineyard growers say, hey, I'm going to talk to my neighbor and make sure that when I spray at a time when I know what the wind speed and wind direction is going to be, so I don't get that type of drift that will end up on their property.
Right. So, in other words, there's going to need to be some level of cooperation because, this is the way these grape growers have been farming for years, right? And so, and essentially, I could understand their concern, right? If all of a sudden they're going to need to make adjustments based on this new crop, which is always scary, right? Anytime you're faced with having to do something new that's a little unpredictable, it's a source of anxiety.
Correct. So, but I guess, again, that's one of the reasons why I think the Ag Commissioner put forth those best management practices, and those should be for, both the vineyard, operators and the hemp or cannabis growers to understand that, if I want to be growing in this spot, I need to be cognizant of what my neighbors are doing. Maybe it's time for them to talk about, okay, so when are you going to be spraying? When are you going to be trucking stuff onto your property? When are you going to, so that way they understand, so that way they can then plan their management practices. And that is the best, then you get the best result if that type of collaboration, implementing best management practices are actually looked at, by both groups of, growers, then we have the best result.
So, George, I know you're very involved with helping shape the rules here in Sonoma County, and I know you're involved in other regions as well. We keep reading a lot about what's happening down in Santa Barbara. Can you share a little bit about what you know about what's happening down there and how that might impact how things are going to be done in Northern California?
Yes. So Santa Barbara County, they just came out. San Luis Obispo County came out and said they were going to put a ban, right? Outright ban in the Etna Valley against hemp. Two reasons they would mention. They were like, well, it's going to cause too much traffic. It's going to lead to crime, and it's going to taint their grapes. Now, all three of those, based on what we've talked about, again, taint, we don't know that. It's not that we don't know that it's not happening right now, right? Theft, we don't know that because, again, who is going to steal hemp that doesn't make them high? Right. But because people don't understand really that, okay, you're looking at, people are thinking that hemp is because they see the plants and because the CBD hemp plants look similar to, marijuana, they get very confused. So they think that, it's going to have, nobody's going to steal that if you're not hiding it. That's why you want to put a sign and say it's hemp. Right. So people understand that the THC content in that hemp, it should be, less than or equal to 0.3% compared to 15% or more in a regular, marijuana plant. So nobody needs that. If they're really looking to get high, they're not looking at hemp. So this whole idea about theft, I haven't seen it yet. I'm yet to see it. When people are growing, I work with people who grow, thousands of acres, in Colorado, and they haven't seen theft yet, And so I don't know. And so that's all, I think it's based on fair less than the science. And so people who have money have been paying for these campaigns. And what they're going to do is now they're going to scare a lot of the farmers who are going to sell their properties because they can't compete.
Right.
They can't compete because the initial investment cost to put in a vineyard is so high that you're going to get some farmers go, I can't do it. So if I cannot make money off my barley, off my grain, off my lettuce, my tomatoes, I'm moving out of the area.
Right.
So what is happening, what we're seeing in Kansas and other places, and even in Colorado, eastern Colorado, Kansas, all the farmers who are grain farmers, the reason why they're able to stay alive is they're taking some of their acreage and planting hemp, whether it's fiber hemp, whether it's CBD hemp, to supplement their income so they can then stay producing the grain, because the grain doesn't, I mean, if you're doing really well with, corn and wheat, you're making about $300 per acre.
Right.
So if that farmer, and for some of those farmers, then they're planting 10,000 acres. So if you're able to plant, let's say 5,000 acres of even fiber hemp and sell it for $1,000 an acre or $12 an acre, that's 3 times more you're getting per acre. For some people, that's the difference between staying in business or selling their farmland.
Right.
So we got to understand all the tobacco farmers in Kentucky, they can't make any money off tobacco right now. So what are they doing? They're moving into hemp. So, and so we're seeing, so in places like Santa Barbara, I think they're going to scare off all the small farmers that cannot afford to put in a vineyard when they could actually help them diversify their farming and say, okay, let's just all learn to coexist and let's just learn to be good neighbors, best management practices. And so we saw Santa Barbara, I think, is going to probably support hemp at some point. San Luis Obispo said no. And I think there are a couple lawsuits right now in the works. People are filing, and I know that's going to be litigated because again, it comes down to the right to farm, right? And the American Farm Bureau has been very clear that if any jurisdiction tries to shut down hemp cultivation, it's about the right to farm, and they will go to court.
Right. So I know that, there's, hemp a little different than cannabis in terms of it's not an inebriant, but it's still part of the cannabis family. In areas like the Midwest or Kentucky, what's the reaction been with, farmers switching over to hemp? Is that negative stigma impacting the farmers that want to switch over, because of the decrease in demand in tobacco, let's say?
Again, I put this forward and say the person who moved for this to be added to the Farm Bill is Mitch McConnell. Okay?
Interesting.
And so that's his base. So these are the folks who are part of his base, who are farmers, who have been generations of farmers, who are losing money. They're not thinking about getting high. They're thinking about just growing hemp to make money because the tobacco industry is dying or is dead. So he's looking at that. If he didn't pass that, he was seeing that as a political suicide, because all the farmers that are part of his base are going to be out of work. They're going to be selling their farms and, just staying home.
Right.
So for him, that was a calculated move to support those farmers. So it wasn't about, so again, people think about this being a political issue, but I think the folks saw it as an economic issue, right? And a quality of life for those farmers, because we could have lost a whole generation of farmers in the Midwest and the South if they didn't pass this, right? So that's what people need to pay attention to. It's an economic issue for most of those farmers. So they're not really looking at, your politics. They're looking at what can I grow to keep my family farm within the family. Yeah. Yeah. So
do you imagine a world in the not too distant future where, here in wine country in Sonoma County, as an example, where you're going to see hemp grows near a vineyard or next to a vineyard?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to happen because, again, we have a changing of vineyard owners, people who are vineyard owners who are willing to experiment, who are willing to do different things, who are not going to say, I can't do this. So we're seeing the demographics of vineyard owners are changing, right? So I have about 4 vineyard owners who have asked me to come and look at their site because they're willing to put in like an acre or 2 acres of hemp within close proximity of their vineyard. But these are vineyard owners who are just looking to experiment, and they're not thinking about all the fear that people are putting out there. They just say, we want to do this as an experiment, right? To know really what happens. So I think you're going to see more of that because you remember when Benzinger started talking about biodynamic farming or having sheep, people were talking about having sheep in the vineyard.
Right.
It was a crazy idea. It was a very crazy idea, right? And so look at where we are today, right? So I just see that shift will happen over time. I think when the fear wears off, it will become normalized and people will just be fine with it. I think the important part for me is just farmers, vineyard owners understand that these folks are also farmers and they want the best for their crops. And of course, those farmers are going to respect the vineyards and say, you know what, they have a dollar value crop there that is very expensive to put in. We're going to make sure we work with them to make sure that they stay in business and we stay in business. I think if they have that mentality going in, it's not all or nothing mentality, then I think these two crops will coexist just fine.
Interesting. So George, just a couple more questions and we're getting ready to wrap it up here. You talked a little bit about the expanding the testing and the research this year. What is that just at Shone Farm or are other regions participating in research similar to what you just done?
So I don't know for sure who else is doing it right now in California, but I know that a couple of vineyards have reached out to me and said that they're putting in a couple acres. So I have to go out the next weeks, a couple of weeks. I'm going to be going out to fields and checking out what they have. And some companies have reached out to me who have special gadgets for capturing data for capturing data for volatile organic compounds. Mm-hmm. So we're going to try to deploy those and see if we can actually track exactly how these terpenes, if they travel, how far they travel, where they end up, just very precise measurements. And at the farm, what my colleagues decided, actually I hadn't even asked, we're just talking about a field, and we have moved the field now to be right across, because it was diagonal from the vineyard.
Right.
Moved it to actually just align perfectly with the vineyard. So the distance is much shorter now. So it's going to be about maybe 40 feet at this point. And it's going to be aligned perfectly. So then we're going to see again what happens. And I think that's just more, again, we're not scheduled to do a lot of this. I'm hoping that I could bring other folks on board from the 4-year schools that are doing, a lot of research. And maybe this becomes a springboard for them to take this work with their graduate students and then, move this to the next level. And that's what we're trying to do, just say, okay, what you were suggesting here doesn't exist,
right?
But we need to move the research forward. And so we're hoping that folks can use it as a baseline as they move their research forward.
Last question, with all of the expansion of hemp being planted and grown and people jumping into the market, that's got to impact demand on some level, right? So what are you seeing there? I mean, are prices dropping?
Prices are dropping tremendously. Well, everybody jumped in, and I've been preaching this for over a year and a half, and people thought I was crazy when I said it. I've said it at several meetings I've spoken at. I said, at some point, the demand for CBD and oil is going to, fade.
Right. But
what stays is, fiber hemp, right? Because that's used in a lot of products, and we're not creating new. We're just kind of switching what we're using because people are so environmentally conscious about sustainability. So we're not trying to create a new use for this. We're just trying to switch some things out. The inputs are what they're using. There's always going to be a use for building, going to be used for clothing, going to be used for, topicals, right, that we're using other inputs for right now that we could switch out. So I think that instead of focusing on the CBD, like if you look around right now, everybody wants to have an extractor to extract oil. Right. But nobody is building a processing plant to process fiber or paper, right? Right. So you can see that people have put so much money because they were trying to get the quick money. But right. But if you look at the fiber industry, that's going to be the long game. It's just pennies that you're getting, but it's going to be here for a long time. Right. Because if a farmer gets a contract to supply fiber to a paper towel company right now, or toilet paper, with COVID, right. I mean, you will get more business than you ever want, right? So I think that's, people got to look at that. So even though it's not a lot of money, it's just a small amount it's a fraction of what you get if you sell oil. But the oil prices fell by at least 50% in some areas in the country in the past year. So we're seeing that drop. So people, I think, are going to be tired. That's why you see people are afraid to actually plant a lot of CBD hemp this year. People are kind of holding off.
Right.
Because some people went from, I had some folks who went from 50 acres of CBD hemp to 2,000 acres. That's too much.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, again, we're not going to be able to get to every single question. But George, I want to put your contact information up here in case anyone has any questions. This is how you can contact Dr. George Sellu directly. And I'm sure there's definitely going to be people who have some questions. So, but George, thank you so much for your time. I thought this was a really interesting conversation, and it might be interesting to come back and re-engage after this year's harvest and see what we've learned after the second round.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, George. Thank you to you and the crew out there for putting this together. It's my pleasure to share this knowledge. As I said, as an educational institution, our goal is to share knowledge, train folks, and move the industry forward. And I look forward to chatting with you soon.
Well, I very much appreciate it. And I just want to also thank everyone in our audience for your time today, for being part of the Wine Industry Network. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I'd like to invite you all to our next webinar, which will take place on July 8th, where we're looking at some case studies on how 3 different wineries and the virtual tastings and virtual programs that they did really impacted their bottom line. So again, George, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in person again soon.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.